From Transport Topics in Washington, D.C., this is RoadSigns. Here is your host, Seth Clevenger.
Thank you for listening to RoadSigns, the podcast series from Transport Topics that examines the trends and technologies that are shaping the future of trucking. In this episode, we're going to take a look at how artificial intelligence and machine learning could change the way transportation companies do business. While artificial intelligence isn't new, it has become much more accessible in recent years as more data has become available, along with greater computing power at lower costs. As a result, we've seen a strong push by many technology companies to take advantage of AI and machine learning, and we're seeing that trend emerge in the transportation industry as well. The term AI tends to conjure up all kinds of images from movies and pop culture, but we're not talking about killer robots or Skynet from Terminator. What we're really dealing with here is software designed to help people work more efficiently and make better business decisions. But how will this move toward AI change the jobs of dispatchers, fleet managers, freight brokers, and other workers in this industry? We'll try to answer that question in this episode. On one hand, AI can allow businesses to automate simple but time-consuming tasks like rekeying information from freight documents, so workers can focus instead on more productive tasks, such as interacting with customers or drivers. AI models also can be designed to analyze data and maybe come to the same conclusions as a human worker, but do so faster and more efficiently while reducing errors. Beyond that, AI programs may be able to identify patterns and trends that a person never would have been able to spot on their own. And this automation will be fueled by more and more data from onboard sensors, telematics, electronic logging devices, and onboard video. To learn more about what the future may hold, we've lined up a couple of guests who are applying AI and machine learning to freight operations today. Later in the program, I'll speak with Ram Ranganathan, Principal Data Scientist at Omnitrax, one of the trucking industry's largest suppliers of in-cab communications, telematics, and data analytics. But first, I'm excited to welcome Parker Holcomb, co-founder and CEO of Freight AI, a technology-enabled freight broker. Thanks for joining the program, Parker.
Thanks for having me.
So artificial intelligence and machine learning may still sound somewhat futuristic to some people, but as you know, many businesses are already using it today, and the transportation industry is no exception. So Parker, I'd like to start by getting your overall assessment of the current status and future potential for AI in transportation. Why is AI a big deal for our industry?
So AI is definitely in its most recent resurgence, and that's been due to a lot of convergence of cheap computing power, the ability for new data to be processed, but there's not much new about the techniques and algorithms that we're been using. The term AI was coined back in the 1950s, and it's gone through different resurgences, winters and springs as they talk about it. But today it's so accessible, and it started to actually drive people's bottom line. So the reason that you may not see AI everywhere, or the reason that you might not say, oh, hey, what is this new technology, is because it's familiar. So, two different areas of artificial intelligence in the toolkit that we'll talk about. Number one is recommendation engines. So recommendation engines are how Netflix finds your next show to watch, or how Amazon finds your next frying pan to sell to you. And so just like 20 years ago, you would ask your friend, hey, what movies should I watch? And he goes, well, I know you really liked the Star Wars, flicks. And so, I think based off of my past experience and observations of you, Seth, you would really like The Matrix. So that was familiar to us. And so it's taking that personalized past data and that experience and delivering something to us that, feels familiar. Now, when we zoom out to our industry, which is one of the most massive industries in the country and in the world, there's so many different points of data. There's so many relationships that it's hard to keep them all straight. And so historically, an intermediary or a freight broker, they might know 20 or 30 different trucking companies, and they might know those preferences and behaviors. And so they in turn can recommend, hey, I think you would be good for the Pennsylvania to Miami route. I know you like to be at the Jags games, in the fall, and I, based off of our previous experience, can make this recommendation to you. And so as we start to scale up and think about how many different options, how many different people There's no way that any one freight broker, any one human could keep this all straight. To put it in perspective, if there were 10 trucks and 10 cities, there would be 3,600,000 different ways to organize those resources. If there was 100 cities and 100 trucks, it would be a 132-digit number of ways that you could organize. Now, fast forward to reality, which is 3 million trucks and millions of pickup and drop-off locations. No human could ever optimally make all of those different matches, or check against all those preferences, or see where people have been in the past. And so the recommendation engine, the recommendation algorithms, can take a lot of those past experiences, and whether it's hundreds or millions or billions of data points, and cross-reference it with current options and current opportunities, which again might be millions, billions, or hundreds of billions of options, and say, hey, based off your preferences and what you like to do, I think that this could be a good match for you. So AI is particularly well suited for this industry because it's actually the most human-centered technology. The past 3 generations of tech, which have been desktop, web, and mobile, those have been generations of technology where it's asking people to speak computer. And AI is a generation of technology where it's computers learning to speak human. And so it's not going to be this like, oh, hey, we just got taken over by this new set of technology. It's here today, it's slowly approaching, but it feels familiar, and it's actually human-centered, which makes it feel like a more natural transition.
Do you have transport topics on your smart speaker? Before enabling transport topics, make sure your Alexa app is connected to your Amazon Echo device and under your Amazon account. Open your Alexa app. On the upper left, click the menu button. Select Skills and Games. Search for transport topics. Click on the first option. Select Enable to Use. Simply say to your Alexa device, Alexa, open transport topics.
Let's go ahead and talk about a little bit more about some of the core benefits of AI. You gave your example of all the different permutations of ways that you might want to route trucks or determine loads and shipments and just figure all this out, all the many possibilities. But one of the common threads for using AI is to automate some of the mundane, repetitive tasks that can be time consuming, but really aren't very maybe mentally stimulating. And this, in theory, can help workers focus instead on more complex issues and get more involved in customer service. So I want to get your take on that as well. How much of the value of AI comes from improving worker productivity by kind of relieving workers of some of the grunt work and repetitive tasks that are out there?
I think it falls into 2 buckets. Yes, it's about relieving repetitive tasks and kind of those low-hanging fruit. That's kind of the repetitive bucket. But then there's also the superpowers bucket, right? Some of the algorithms today can make a better recommendation on what trucking company to use than 15 years ago, 5 PhDs sitting in a room for 5 straight days, and by the time they're done with their analysis, the information is over. So it's definitely about enhancing the productivity of those workers, but it's not just removing the mundane; it's also giving them superpowers. So an example of how we do it here at Freight. So let's talk about dispatching a truck. So any legacy freight broker, traditional freight broker, the carrier rep should find when and where that driver is supposed to be empty. If it's 45 minutes away and an hour before pickup, that's a lot different than 3 hours away and a day before pickup. But you want to be able to check out and make that verification. So maybe first step is you reach out to the dispatcher. You find out when and where they're going to be empty. Then you set a reminder to reach out at that time to confirm that was happening. Then the dispatcher says, let me check with him. I'll get back to you in 5 minutes. And you have to set another timer for 5 minutes. Then they give you his tracking info or maybe a phone number. You try to call once, you try to text. You've been spending 45 minutes thinking about this, and you don't know if it's a problem or you don't know it's okay. 45 minutes later, you finally get the driver on the phone. He says, hey, sorry, I was taking a shower. I will be at pickup in 15 minutes. So everything was okay, but you still spent 45 minutes trying to check and who to figure out and setting timers and when to follow up at the appropriate time. And so what Archie does is our internal assistant, our co-pilot, he will know that he needs to reach out at 3:02 p.m. and reach out to the dispatcher. If they say, hey, I'll get back to you in 5 minutes, well, then Archie can usually follow up in 6 minutes and say, hey, just following up here. Archie can get the driver tracking information, can send a text, and then if it's still an issue or if it's outside the normal parameters of response time, Archie can pop up to one of our agents and say, hey, I've done X, Y, and Z, but looks like we need to call the driver. Can I connect you? Connect. Hey, was just taking a shower. I'll be there in 15 minutes. So that just took 45 minutes of meaningless nonsense work and shrunk it down to 45 seconds of a verification. And so, the ultimate, kind of dream of an assistant is it brings you decisions to verify rather than, a problem to solve. So that's an example of, it shrinking down, time and just taking what a human could do and doing it automated. But at the same time, there's other parts of a flow that a human could never do. So, when we are reaching out or we're sourcing a new lane, a traditional broker might have 100, 1,000 people on their floor starting to make phone calls, and they can make 100 phone calls a day. They're only capturing as much data, as they want to before they move on to the next call. Well, Archie, with one person overseeing it, can have 100 simultaneous conversations per minute. And so, a human can only focus on 2-3 things at once. Archie can focus on 100 things at once, 1,000 things at once, 1,000,000 things at once, and then can start to pull patterns out of those conversations. So say we're having 100 simultaneous conversations over text message, email, EDI, whatever it might be, all these different communication channels. And you start to pick out these different patterns or behaviors, or, hey, the response rate is usually, 1 minute and 30 seconds. The response rate right now is 20 seconds on average. What does that mean? Did we find, is capacity, loosening up? Did we find a great opportunity lane? And so those types of relationships and associations, the best freight broker ever, couldn't figure out. So it fits into 2 buckets. It fits into automation of low-hanging fruit, and it fits into superpowers and PhD level expertise.
And let's also take a quick moment to talk a little bit more about how AI could change sort of the daily jobs in the industry and just the day-to-day tasks that a typical worker might perform. Say some of your employees versus an employee at a more traditional freight broker. As we've been discussing, AI is really here to provide support for employees rather than simply replacing them altogether. But it's just this tool that can handle all this information and make decisions, and then the worker is now essentially overseeing it and verifying the conclusions. And just how different will the jobs, say, of a typical employee at a freight broker change?
Our target is to automate 80% of the process. Yes, there's the opportunities for advanced insights. AI is not going to just make your life easier. It's actually going to make your life harder. You're not going to show up to work in 2 years and just be sipping a coffee while Archie does all your work for you. Archie's going to be doing the low-hanging fruit, the easy stuff, and you're going to be stuck solving hard, complex problems, working on relationships, making tough decisions, weighing the trade-offs of what the customer wants versus what the carrier wants versus an insurance company who recently got involved versus is it a new company or a pre-existing. So it's somewhat of a paradox here that it's actually going to make all of our lives a lot harder as we try to keep up and still outcompete the algorithms.
So really we'll be doing more sort of strategic thinking and handling relationships rather than some of the more mundane and
what we're great at, is balancing trade-offs and interacting with humans. And one of my favorite things to think about is I still believe that there will be radiologists in 10 years. They'll be using the best AI image recognition software, but once that AI presents it to a radiologist, he'll have to weigh the needs of the patient, the insurance company, the consent of the patient, the family, the hospital, and an algorithm is probably not going to appear in court either. It's going to be out there. You're going to be interacting with people. It's going to be a long time before we have general intelligence that can hold a random conversation. But there's a whole lot of opportunities to enhance our process and make our systems more efficient.
And before I let you go, I do want to ask you the typical crystal ball question. Where do you see AI in the transportation business, say 10 years from now?
I think a primary opportunity for AI will be to listen to all the needs across the supply chain. There will be billions of sensors throwing out different pieces of information, from electronic devices to sensors on manufacturing equipment, talking about inventory levels. And I think AI will be the primary toolkit that listens to all of this internet of conversations and is able to pull out suggestions and insights on how we can efficiently run our supply chains and allocate our resources, while humans work on the harder stuff, the relationships, and moving things forward.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. Thanks again for joining the program and sharing your insights.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Transport topics in one word: authoritative.
Knowledge.
Outstanding.
Reliable.
We ask Transport Topics readers to describe us in one word.
Informative.
Informative.
Integrity.
The Bible. Authoritative.
The authority. Transportation information, that's two, but I gotta have it both.
Physically large. Oh, that's 2 words.
Visit influence.ttnews.com/say hello to find out what they're talking about.
Next on RoadSigns, we're excited to welcome Ram Ranganathan, Principal Data Scientist at Omnitrax, one of the trucking industry's largest technology suppliers. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Seth. Pleasure.
So I attended Omnitrax user conference in Dallas earlier this year, and one of the big topics of discussion was how data and AI could allow fleets to begin making better business decisions based on cost per hour rather than cost per mile. And I thought that was a pretty interesting take, so I'd like to dive into that here with this interview. First off, why does it make sense for the industry to shift its focus toward time as the most important metric rather than distance?
Let's talk about this huge problem that the industry is facing today, right? They're really struggling to retain drivers, right? Let's take, for example, a rookie driver drives about an average 2,500 miles a week. And with all the harsh rules, let's say he drives maybe 70 hours a week. And if the rookie is making 30 cents per mile, then he's just making $750 a week, which comes to about $10 a week. And then on the other side of it, we wonder why we are not able to retain drivers. So the miles might not be a good measure of how do you pay these drivers. So the other way, if you paid these drivers by hours, then I think that is a much better way of paying them, and it will also be a better way of retaining your drivers.
Sure, certainly from the driver's standpoint, time is money as well, not just miles. And you think of driver detention time at shippers and receivers facilities, traffic delays, weather conditions, and of course just hours of service constraints all add up. And simply the miles that a driver travels doesn't capture all the work that goes into it and how profitable they can be.
Yeah, I mean, we did an analysis a couple of years ago for one of the a large trucking company in the Midwest. And the analysis that we did for basically detention time across the different, customers, and there was this just one specific retailer. We were looking at the data from January 2016 to September 2016, so it was like a 9-month period. And at this one retailer, there was, approximately 12,000 hours of detention time over just that 9-month period. And if you just put any dollar figure to, per hour cost, then you can see the amount of money that's being wasted just at that one location. And so it is a big problem, right? And you see the industry is picking up on it, and Omnitrax has all of this data about where the truck picks up load from and where it's dropping off the load to. And we have enormous amount of historical data across US, Mexico, and Canada. And at each point or each geolocation, we can actually say, this was the amount of time that was spent at that geolocation, which is a proxy to detention time. It could be, the context also matters, because if he's detained on a road or if he's detained on a highway, then that could be traffic. But if we actually know it is where he's loading or unloading, then we can say it is detention. So Omnitrax has a lot of data to do those kind of predictions.
Yeah, and your CEO, Ray Greer, at the user conference earlier this year did make the argument that your company, with its, of course, very large base of fleet customers, collects enough data at all these different locations, pickup delivery locations, really across the continent, to calculate detention time really for each individual site. Do you feel like you're at that level now where you can now just kind of look at this not just as a kind of a broad issue, but let's pinpoint the real wait times at each facility?
Yeah, I can personally say, because I work on that project, and there's lots of POCs, different POCs being built internally right now, and the results actually look really promising. We cannot, exactly say that for all of the location, but for a large amount of the locations that Omnitrax has, I think we can confidently say, we can predict that detention time.
Okay. And I also want to talk a little bit about truck parking. This is another big issue that drivers are encountering these days. And we're hearing that drivers may have to spend some extra time at the end of the day just searching for parking. Or maybe they stop their day a little bit early because they know they can actually park at their current location, and maybe they're not so sure a little bit further down the road. So that's also eating into time a little bit. So how can technology companies like Omnitrax start to get a handle on the time associated with just finding available truck parking as well?
Yeah, I mean, right now you see, different companies providing these parking related apps where say, in the next 10 miles, you have a parking spot with this many empty spots. But, I think Omnitrax is, it has a unique perspective, because it has the geolocation of the truck from point A to point B. It also knows the hours of service involved, like how many hours does the driver have on this day, to how many more miles can he drive, or how many hours can he left in this day that he can drive. And if we can add, locations of parking along the way, if you're able to enrich our data, right? So we have at a very minute level geolocations for the entire trip. And one of the other projects that's going on is to enrich just these geolocations. Like a geolocation could be a highway, it could be a parking spot, it could be a gas station, it could be a truck stop, it could be loading, unloading, it could be a retailer, it could be a distribution center. So internally, Omnitrax is trying to enrich all of these geolocations. And once we enrich these geolocations, meaning this geolocation has a particular address and these are the businesses in this address, then I think these detention times or dwell times mean different things. For example, if we know that this geolocation is a parking spot or a truck stop, and if we say, this is how long trucks wait, then we can, I think, along the way say, okay, you have this many hours left in your day to drive, and you are entering Atlanta or a big city, and you're not going to make it to the other side of the city, and you might want to park here. So I think OmniTrax, with the amount of data that it has, and with the various different data sources that it has, in terms of geolocation, in terms of all these enriched geolocation, and also hours of service, I think we are at a good spot to say, predict parking spot, and also say this is a good spot for you to park.
Okay. And as we've discussed, it's relatively easy, of course, to measure miles. You know how far a truck will need to travel to make a delivery, but some of these examples that we've gone over, we see that time is much more complex. It's harder to predict, but now with the data that's increasingly available, we can start to understand things like detention time and traffic delays and hours of service availability to make better assessments of the actual time involved in making a delivery. So once you do have this reliable measurement for cost per hour, what can you do with that? I mean, do you see fleets choosing to accept or decline loads based on that time, or even start pricing their services that way?
Yeah, exactly. So the example that I gave for the trucking company in the Midwest, when they accept a load from this retailer again, they might actually say, hey, you can give them specific numbers on this is how long we spend in detention when we come to one of your retailer, one of the offices. And this is not something. So this is either you reduce the detention time, or this is how much you need to pay us to pick up this load and drop it off. So these are conversations that a trucking company can have with their customer and negotiate better rates, or even think about dropping that customer altogether to make the operations much more profitable. So when you are equipped with this kind of data, I think our customers in a much better position to negotiate the rates.
Absolutely, and especially in an industry like trucking that operates on pretty thin margins, having that intelligence, that knowledge of exactly what is profitable and what isn't profitable is really something that seems perfectly suited for this industry. And I also want to ask you just how AI will factor into these cost per hour calculations. I mean, do you see this making it easier and faster to make all these kinds of determinations and calculations, looking at all these different factors at once? And the use of AI, makes it so much easier than trying to have a data scientist like yourself trying to crunch all the numbers and do this manually.
Yeah, I think to some extent, with the amount of cloud computing resources that we have, and the powerful algorithms that we have, and also the most important part being, the amount of good data that OmniTrax has, like the historical data that OmniTrax has. This is something I think AI and machine learning will be able to crunch much more faster and much more efficiently.
And how else is Omnitrax using AI today, and how do you see that expanding in the future?
So we have been building predictive models, machine learning models, for the last decade or so. So currently we use it in terms of predicting accidents. So we can predict accidents using several different data sources. We can go to a customer, get all of the data they have, and build custom machine learning models for them. Or we can just use just the hours of service data and build predictive models. So some of the most popular products for us are, predicting driver quits. Drivers who will quit in the next week or in the next month, or drivers who will have an accident in the next week or next month. The way I see AI and machine learning being used in the future is, you will see AI being used in pretty much every area of trucking, in safety, in operational efficiency, in HR where they're trying to recruit drivers. When you have so many applications coming in, you want to make sure that you get the right kind of drivers into your company who will fit your company culture. If not, then that's going to lead to more attrition, right? So recruitment is another way. You can use AI, machine learning. Retaining drivers, which already Omnitrax does, is another way. And with all of these dash cams coming into trucks, right, there's also going to be a lot of real-time predictions on traffic sign violation, traffic light violation, stop sign violation, following too closely. There's going to be a whole lot of additional critical events that can be generated using AI and machine learning, like computer vision, using computer vision and machine learning.
Yeah, certainly a lot to look forward to in the years ahead. So much is happening, and there's so much more we can understand when you use the data the right way. This has been a lot of great insight, but I do think that's a good stopping point. So thanks again for joining us, Ram, and sharing your thoughts on this.
Thank you, Seth.
When a Transport Topics reporter sits down to write a breaking news story, he or she knows that every word, every quote, every image matters. Across TT's more than 80-year history, some of the best journalists in transportation have dedicated themselves to getting the stories that this very large, very fast-moving industry needs to read, with new media channels and programs that allow us to extend our reach and tell even more great trucking stories. Web, print, video, podcasting, all part of our repertoire, all part of our craft.
Before we wrap up, let's take a moment to review what we've learned and revisit our original question of how AI will change jobs within the transportation industry. In the years ahead, it does appear likely that the day-to-day tasks performed by workers in our industry will shift to some degree as certain functions become more automated through the use of AI. But AI will not automate everything. Over time, computers will become more adept at performing repetitive tasks and analyzing data to recognize hidden trends, but they won't be able to build relationships with customers or talk to a driver who's having a rough day. The industry will still need to rely on people to handle the human interactions that are at the heart of our industry. And of course, people will still need to make strategic decisions and solve problems as they arise. But with AI and machine learning, transportation workers will have more powerful software tools to support them in their missions and hopefully help them take their businesses to the next level. That's all for Season 2 of RoadSigns, but Season 3 is right around the corner. In the coming weeks, we'll be taking a close look at how fleets are making progress on the endless march toward greater efficiency and fuel savings. Until then, I'm Seth Clevenger. Thank you for listening.